close your eyes for just a moment, imagine the soft crunch of gravel under your boots, the gentle whisper of wind brushing past your ear, and the steady rhythm of your breath as you step onto a trail you've never walked before. This isn't just any trail. This is where silence gets louder, where every snap of a twig feels like it's meant only for you, where the soothing ASMR sounds of nature slowly turn into something darker. You thought you came here for peace, but what you'll hear next will keep you awake tonight. You're listening to ASMR 404Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So this happened last fall when I drove up to the Bright Angel Trailhead at the Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona on October 21st, 2022 at exactly 5:47 a.m. I remember the time because I checked my phone before shutting it in airplane mode, since the service drops out so fast in those parts and I didn't want to burn my battery. I had this whole plan to start early before the heat picked up and the tourists started pouring in, and I thought I was being smart about it, but now I don't even know how to describe what happened out there except in this weird long way, because if I don't spill it all out piece by piece, I think I might go crazy. The parking lot was almost empty that morning with just a couple of rental SUVs and one old truck parked crooked like the owner had been too tired to straighten out. I remember the way the pre-dawn air felt like a freezer against my skin, dry and sharp. It carried this strange silence that made the whole place feel paused, like the canyon itself was holding its breath, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked to the trailhead sign. My pack slung heavy on my shoulders and the brim of my cap tugged low, Bright Angel is a busy trail by most standards, but at that hour it felt abandoned, like I had slipped into some private version of the park, a ghost version, where everything looked the same but something subtle was missing. I remember thinking that I could hear the Colorado River even though I knew I was miles from the bottom, and the sound didn't match the distance. It was too close to wet to urgent, like a rushing heartbeat just out of sight. It made my stomach tighten in this small way I didn't want to admit to myself. He tightened the straps on my pack and started down the first switchbacks, the trail dropping quick and steep through the K-Bob limestone walls, and every step kicked up little clouds of dust that clung to the back of my throat, and I tried to focus on the rhythm of my breathing in and out, because that's how I keep myself calm when I hike alone. But there was something off about that rhythm. It kept feeling like another breath was sneaking in between mine, like someone was behind me, matching step for step and inhaling just half a beat too late. When I turned around, the trail was empty, clean-cut rock walls, and that pale light of morning crawling down like fingers. He told myself it was just my nerves, or maybe a mountain lion shadowing me, though that didn't really add up, since mountain lions don't usually follow that close without striking, and the thought of it made me grip the handle of my trekking pole a little tighter, like that skinny piece of aluminum would actually help me in a fight. I pushed forward down the switchbacks until I hit the first rest house, and that's when I saw it at first. It looked like a person sitting on the stone bench facing away from me, hunched over with their arms wrapped tight around their knees like they were cold or sick. I felt this rush of relief because a human presence meant I wasn't alone, and the weird breathing sounds could be explained, but as I got closer something about the posture seemed wrong, the spine too long, the shoulders jutting at strange angles, like a scarecrow stuffed into the shape of a man, and the closer I got the more I noticed this smell leaking out of the air around the bench like wet iron and spoiled meat mixed with dessert dust, and my relief turned sour in a single instant. I stopped maybe 10 feet away and cleared my throat because that's what you do when you don't want to startle someone, but the figure didn't move, no flinch. No tilt of the head, just that huddled posture, and I realized the hair on the back of my neck was standing so stiff it hurt, and the canyon was holding that same impossible silence, except for that river sound too close to loud, and I finally said, "Are you okay?" But my voice came out cracked like a kid caught lying. The figure shifted not with any natural grace, but with this slow grinding jerk like joints that hadn't been used in years, and the head turned just enough that I could see the cheek pale gray in the dawn light, and the mouth stretched wider than it should have stretched, a line that tore toward the air without blood, without tearing sound, just open to wide. I swear to God I heard it breathe in with that same half-beat delay, like it was inhaling my own breath from the air between us. My whole body wanted to run, but my legs felt nailed to the trail, and I don't even know how long I stood there staring, waiting for it to move again, and then a noise cut through, canyon sharp and real, the bray of a mule coming down the trail with one of those early ranger groups, and the figure on the bench collapsed in on itself like fabric folding flat, and when the mule train rounded the corner a minute later, the bench was empty like nothing had been there. Ed Alley didn't tell the ranger what I saw, because how do you even start a conversation like that? Hey, by the way, there was a nightmare thing sitting on the bench, and it breathed like me and then vanished under your mule's nose. I just nodded and smiled and kept walking like I hadn't almost lost my mind in the first mile, but the deeper I went, the more that feeling clung to me like a second skin, like the canyon was pressing against me, whispering in that water voice under the earth, and I knew I wasn't walking alone anymore, even if my eyes couldn't prove it. So I kept hiking down into the red layers of Sapai sandstone, the sun climbing higher behind me, painting the walls with fire and shadow, and every step felt heavier, like the pack had doubled in weight, though I knew it hadn't. My breaths kept catching on that phantom half-beat, and when I finally dared to glance back, thought I saw a smear of movement hugging the switchback behind me, not shaped like a person or an animal, but like the shadow of one stretched too thin and too tall against the rock. That was only the beginning, and I wish I had turned back right there at the first rest house. I wish I had trusted that instinct that said something was deeply wrong, but pride or stubbornness or stupidity pushed me deeper. By the time I realized the truth, the trailhead was too far behind me to save me. I pushed farther down the trail past the red stone walls, where the light started to deepen into this strange glow that never looked quite right. I told myself it was just the way the sun bounces through the canyon layers, but I knew deep down that it was something else, something not part of the natural order of the place, because the shadows stretched and folded in ways that didn't match the angle of the morning. Every time I blinked, I felt like I caught the tail end of something retreating just out of my line of sight like I was sharing the trail with a dozen unseen hikers who never quite let themselves be caught by the time I hit the section where the trail opens wider, and you can see far down toward the garden area. I was sweating even though the air was still cool. My pack dug into my shoulders like hands pressing me down. I couldn't shake the memory of that figure on the bench, the way it folded in on itself like clothing without bones, and the smell. Put iron hung in my nose as if it had followed me like some stubborn perfume that you can't scrub out of your skin, and it was then that I heard it again. That sound of the river rushing far closer than it should have been, gurgling and hissing. Yet I could see the dry switchbacks and the silent stone cliffs with no water anywhere near. I stopped for a snack, trying to ground myself with something simple like trail mix and jerky. But when I pulled the zipper open on my pack, the inside was damp like the fabric had been sprayed with mist, and my fingers came out slick with something that looked dark against my skin, almost black in the shaded light, and it smelled like rust and rot. I felt my stomach roll, and I stuffed everything back in and zipped it up fast, telling myself maybe a hydration bladder had leaked. I knew it hadn't because I didn't bring one. I only carried bottles when I started walking again. I realized the sound of footsteps had returned behind me, steady and deliberate, and this time I didn't turn around, because something in my gut said not to. Something told me that if I looked I'd see more than I could handle, and so I just kept going with my eyes forward and the crunch of gravel under my boots was echoed exactly half a breath later by the crunch of gravel under something else. That wasn't me, and I swear the rhythm sensed with my heartbeat until I felt like I was walking in someone else's chest. Trail curved toward a shaded cove where the rock overhangs and cools the air, and I ducked into it for relief. But inside it smelled worse than the pack had smelled, a stink like rotting fish and copper pennies soaked in blood, and my vision swam as if the shadows were thicker than they should be, almost like smoke hanging low, and in that haze I saw shapes moving. Not people, not animals, but outlines jagged and stretched limbs to long eyes to many. And they whispered in voices I didn't recognize, words that had no shape, only sound like water boiling, and a kid lie backed out fast, almost slipped on the gravel. When I came into the sunlight again, the stink was gone, but I could still feel those voices buzzing under my skin, crawling behind my ears like ants, and that was when I noticed something that almost broke me. The other hikers, ranger groups, the mule trains, the chatter and clatter of the busiest trail in the whole park. They were gone, no sound, no figures ahead or behind, just me and the canyon, and the invisible thing that matched my steps and breathed my air, and the weight of that absence crushed me harder than the sight of any monster could have. I don't know how long I walked after that. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time lost its grip. The sun felt stuck overhead, refusing to move, and the walls of the canyon pulsed with heat like a living thing, and at one point I passed a pile of stones stacked neatly in the middle of the trail like a cairn, but taller than me, with little pieces of bone wedged between the rocks, finger bones maybe, or bird wings. It was hard to tell, but I swear I saw them twitch as if still alive, and when I circled wide around it, I heard a low laugh rolling out of the canyon like the cliffs themselves. It found me amusing. I finally staggered into Indian Garden where there should have been shade. and picnic tables and bright green cottonwoods, but the place was dead. The trees looked withered, and black the ground cracked and dry as if it hadn't seen water in 100 years, and the tables were overturned, splintered, like something had smashed through them with brute force. And in the middle of the garden, there was a pit, a wide black pit that I knew wasn't supposed to be there, and from that pit came the sound of the river, louder than ever, roaring up through stone and dust and pulling at me with invisible hands. He tried to back away, but the ground trembled under my boots. I dropped to one knee as the tremor rattled through canyon walls, and I could feel the breath again. That half-beat delay sucking at the air between us, stronger now, deeper, like a bellows feeding a furnace. And I thought if I turned around this time, I would see the thing finally fully revealed. But my fear locked me forward, staring into that pit where shadows coiled like smoke, and faces flickered one after another, human faces stretched and screaming, each mouth opening wider than the last, until they all blurred into a single cavernous grin. The world tilted and I fell forward, catching myself just short of the pit. When I hit the ground, my hands came away wet with that same dark liquid that wasn't water. The smell choked me and I gagged and scrambled backward, clawing at the dirt until I slammed against one of the dead trees, and its bark peeled under my grip like skin, too soft to belong to wood, and I felt it pulse like a vein beating against my palm. I screamed without meaning to just raw noise ripped from my chest, and the canyon swallowed it whole, without echo, without mercy. Don't remember how I got back on my feet, but I ran away from the pit, away from Indian gardens, stumbling like a drunk man, my back swinging heavy behind me, and every few steps felt a tug like something inside was pulling me backward, like I wasn't carrying supplies anymore, but carrying something alive that wanted out. And when I dared to unzip it again, I saw nothing inside, just blackness deeper than shadow, and the smell rolled out so strong I nearly vomited on the trail, and I zipped it shut fast and kept running. Footsteps behind me turned into a rhythm like drumming on hollow logs, and the canyon walls themselves seemed to beat with it in unison, a slow, deep cadence that didn't belong to any human or animal. And the whispers came again, but louder, forming almost words, almost names, and I thought I heard my own name stretched and twisted into something sharp that didn't belong to me but pierced into me all the same. And I ran harder, ignoring the burn in my lungs, ignoring the ache in my legs, until I thought my body would split apart. When I finally stopped, I was somewhere unfamiliar, a stretch of trail I didn't recognize, though I had studied the maps. I should have known every bend, every switchback, but this place was wrong. The rock around me was black, not red, and the air was thick like smoke, and I realized with a kind of sinking dread that I wasn't on the Bright Angel Trail anymore, at least not the version of it that existed on any map. And the canyon ahead yawned open with walls that leaned inward like teeth closing on prey, and the only way forward was into that throat. Canyon throat pulled me in without asking, like the trail had ceased to be a choice, become a conveyor dragging me deeper into its ribs, and I could feel the pulse of the stone through my boots, like each step pressed against some buried tree of the earth, and the air inside was damp, though no water ran across the ground. I could smell that same mixture of iron and rot with something sweet behind it, like decaying fruit, and I remember thinking how wrong it was to be both repulsed and lulled at the same time, the stink making my eyes water while some other part of me relaxed, as though the scent was home. Walls leaned so close above my head that the strip of sky vanished altogether and the light went gray then black, but somehow I could still see, though I wasn't sure with what part of myself I was seeing, because my eyes had long since stopped feeling like my own and the path curved downward in long spirals, narrowing and widening in pulses, and I realized with dawning horror that it wasn't cut stone at all. It was something like flesh disguised as canyon rock. Every few yards the surface quivered against my shoulder when I brushed too close, and left a smear of damp against my jacket. He should have turned back then, but the trail behind me had sealed shut the moment I glanced over my shoulder, the way a mouth closes when it's done swallowing, and instead of the faint light of morning, there was only blackness so total that it seemed physical, like a wall pressed up against me, and when I reached out my hand it met something smooth and warm and trembling that throbbed like muscle, and I pulled back fast and told myself not to touch it again, because if I let myself linger I might have. Sunk right throat whispers came again, louder this time, not from the walls, but from inside my skull, as if my own bones had learned how to speak, and they said things in voices I almost recognized. A teacher I had once, a childhood friend, my mother, speaking words I never remembered her saying, each voice rising and falling like a chorus. And threaded between them was another sound like a rushing river, never stopping, never slowing. When I focused on it too hard, I thought I could pick out words in the water to names and commands and bargains, but every time I tried to hold on to them, they slipped away like fish darting through my fingers. He stumbled into a chamber. The walls spread wide and the ground sloped into a basin filled, not with water, but with a dark liquid that moved as if breathing. I swear I saw hands reaching from its surface, hundreds of them grasping and flexing and curling into fists before sinking again, and faces to mouths stretched in silent screams, eyes rolling wild, and I dropped my gaze because if I stared too long, I knew I'd see someone I recognized floating among them, and that thought nearly undid me. I pressed my back against the wall, breathing fast, but every inhale tasted like that, liquid as if the air itself had been drawn from the pool, and I realized the delayed breath that haunted me was gone, because I was inside it now, inside the place where it lived. It no longer needed to chase me, it had me completely and utterly, and the silence that followed was worse than the sound had been, because silence meant attention. I could feel its attention sink into me, like hooks sliding under skin. Something stirred in the liquid and began to rise, a shape too large to comprehend. At first, shoulders emerging like cliffs, dripping black fluid arms that bent at angles no joint should allow, and a head that never settled on one shape. It flickered from a child's round face to an old man sunken one, to an animal muzzle to something like bone, and back again faster than my eyes could track. Every shift made my stomach twist as if the world itself disagreed with what I was seeing and tried to reject it, but couldn't. That thing spoke without speaking, the liquid, rounded, vibrating impulses that rattled my teeth and sank into my marrow. And though no language formed in the air, I understood the meaning in my body rather than my mind. It asked me why I had come, and I wanted to scream that I hadn't chosen. That I had only wanted a quiet hike before the tourists showed up, but when I opened my mouth, no sound came, just liquid rising in my throat, burning like acid, and I fell to my knees gagging and coughing as black spatters hit the ground and hissed like oil on a skeleton. Lean closer, though closer wasn't the right word, because the space between us stretched and folded like cloth until its face, or one of its faces, was inches from mine, and I could see every detail too clearly. The pores, the teeth, the wet twitching of an eye, and it breathed into me. I felt my own chest rise against my was sensing with its rhythm, and for a moment I couldn't tell which lungs were mine and which were its, and I thought maybe I had always been breathing for it, carrying its rhythm. Since long before I knew this trail existed, I don't remember standing, but suddenly I was moving again down a tunnel that sloped sharper and sharper, until I was half sliding, half running, unable to stop. Elementum and the air screamed around me, though no wind moved and the walls blurred, until all I saw was streaks of black and red, and the smell grew unbearable, sweet and foul together, like a feast rotting in the sun, and I clawed at the ground to slow myself, but my nails came away bloody from the friction. I realized the floor itself had teeth, tiny sharp ridges that scraped away at my skin. As I passed it, when I finally stopped, I was in another chamber, this one smaller, the ceiling so low I had to crouch, and in the center sat a figure cross-legged facing me, and I thought at first it was a man until he lifted his head and I saw his face was my own, not a mirror image, not a trick of light, but my exact face, eyes and nose and mouth, and even the scar on my chin from when I fell off my bike as a kid. And he smiled at me with a grin too wide, tearing almost to the ears, and said in my voice, "You made it farther than the others," and that was when I knew I was in the first chamber. Walls pulsed as if agreeing with him, and the ground shivered under his words. And he rose to his feet in one smooth motion that felt wrong, like gravity worked different for him. And he stepped closer, and I wanted to back away, but the wall behind me pressed in like a living thing, refusing to let me retreat, and he raised his hand. I saw his palm was black, slick with the same liquid, and he reached for my chest. And though he never touched me, I felt heat bloom inside like fire spreading through my ribs, and I screamed again, only this time the sound echoed back not from stone, but from his mouth, my own scream spilling out of his lips, as if he had stolen it from me. Staggered forward, swinging blindly with my trekking pole, and for a second it connected with his shoulder and sank in deeper than it should have, like stabbing into wet clay, and he shrieked not in my voice, but in 1,000 voices all at once, children and men, and women and animals and things I couldn't place, all layered until the chamber shook and the walls cracked open. With black light pouring through, he bolted past him through the split wall, and found myself on another trail, but not Bright Angel, not anything carved by human hands. It wound upward in jagged steps that cut my boots, and every few yards there were markers carved from bone tall as me, with symbols etched into them that made my eyes water to look at. And between them the air shimmered like heat haze, though the temperature dropped so cold I could see my breath in thick white clouds he climbed, because there was no other choice. and behind me the sound of my double's voices rose again, climbing with me, always just out of sight. And the trail narrowed until it was no wider than. My body pressed against the cliff with the abyss yawning below and shapes moving in the dark, like massive fish swimming through the air, and I thought if I slipped even once they would rise and catch me before I hit bottom, not to save me but to keep me alive long enough to finish whatever this place had planned. The climb stretched on and on until my legs screamed with every step. My lungs burned like someone was stoking coals inside them, and the cold was so sharp it cut through my jacket straight into my bones, and yet the sweat poured down my face like I was standing in desert heat, and every time I wiped my forehead my glove came away streaked. But that same dark liquid instead of sweat, and the sight of it made me sick. But I had no choice except to keep moving up, because behind me the sound of the voices swelled louder, as if the canyon itself was trying to crawl after me. Wearing my own facade, bone markers grew taller, the carvings deeper and more twisted, and the air between them shimmered harder until it looked like glass, stretched thin about to shatter, and when I brushed too close my skin tingled with electricity, and the hairs on my arms rose stiff as needles, and for a split second I thought I saw through the shimmer into something else, not canyon walls, but endless flat land soaked in red light, with towers in the distance that looked like ribs piercing the sky, and figures moving between them, dragging chains too heavy for their bodies, and I tore my gaze away, because if I stared too long I knew I would lose my footing and tumble into that vision and never find my way back eventually. The trail ended at a ledge jutting out over a black gulf so wide I couldn't see the other side, and the floor of it shifted like a living sea full of massive shadows, rolling over each other. At the edge of the ledge stood another cairn, this one not made of stone or bone, but of gear, hiking boots and torn packs and water bottles stacked high like offerings. I saw brands I recognized, one sold at Ray, and others I had never heard of, ancient things stitched from rough hide and bone, and at the very top was a phone-cracked screen still glowing faintly, though I knew no service could reach this deep. On the display I saw a name, one that matched. My knees staggered back from the pile, heart hammering, but the ledge trembled under my boots, and the whisper returned, not inside my head this time, but rising from the gulf itself. Tens of thousands of voices layered and moving like currents in water, and they all spoke in unison, though the words shifted too fast to grasp. One moment prayers, one moment screams, one moment laughter, all cycling through me like a storm, and then they stilled, and in the silence a single voice, clear and sharp cut through it, and it said, "Go down." The edge crumbled under me. I slid before I could resist, tumbling into that gulf, falling faster than gravity should allow, and the air tore at me as I dropped, but no wind touched my skin. It was sound, not air, or of those voices screaming past me, and I flailed, reaching for anything to grab. But there was nothing, only blackness and the glowing afterimage of those ribbed towers in my vision. Until suddenly I wasn't falling anymore, I was standing knees, buckled on ground so soft it gave beneath my boots like wet clay. Found myself in a cavern that stretched wider than the sky above the Grand Canyon, the ceiling lost in darkness, the walls slick with that same glistening sheen, and the ground pulsed faintly underfoot like a heartbeat, slow and steady, and everywhere around me figures kneeling in rows, endless rows fading into the distance, their bodies gaunt. Gray their heads bowed, and when I stepped closer to one I saw their faces blank. Skin stretched tight, without eyes, without mouths, only smooth plains where features should have been. And yet they whispered, still voices seeping from them like air escaping a crack. I felt bile rise in my throat at the sight of them he walked between the rows, because there was no other path, and every head turned toward me as I passed. They had no eyes to see me with, and their whispers grew louder, weaving into a chant that built and built until it shook my ribs and rattled my teeth, and I realized with horror that the chant was my name repeated over and over, distorted but unmistakable, and with each repetition it felt like a piece of me was being peeled away and offered to them like strips of skin. At the far end of the cavern I saw an archway carved not from stone but from bone, massive curved femurs locked together and hung with strips of hide that fluttered though no wind blew, and beyond the arch was light. Not daylight, but something thicker like liquid gold. Churning in when I stepped through, I felt my body seize as if every muscle clenched at once, and then release, leaving me trembling and gasping. On the other side was a hall lined with mirrors, but the mirrors were not glass, they were water-held, bright rippling, and in each surface I saw myself at different ages. A child running with scraped knees, a teenager scowling in a school photo, a man older than I am now, eyes sunken and teeth missing, and as I passed each one they reached for me from the water, fingers breaking the surface though never quite emerging, and their mouths open in screams though the sound came out as whispers. Same as the faceless ones behind me, pressed forward, shoving past them until I reached the last mirror, and this one showed not me but the figure I had seen at the rest house bench, hunched and twisted with its mouth torn wide, and as I stared the water split open. It crawled through onto the ground before me, dripping wet though the floor stayed dry, and it rose taller than before, shoulders scraping the hall walls. It opened its mouth wider and wider until I thought it would split in half. From inside poured a flood of that black liquid, rushing toward me, turned and ran back through the hall as the flood chased me, mirrors shattering as it hit them, each one spilling versions of myself that screamed as they drowned. And I sprinted through the arch of bone, back into the cavern of faceless kneelers, and they raised their heads in unison and opened mouths that hadn't been there before, hundreds of mouths tearing open across their blank faces, and they screamed my name as the liquid swept through, swallowing them in waves. The ground buckled and I stumbled, falling hard, my back splitting open at last, and when I looked back into it I saw not gear, but a hollow filled with that same liquid swirling like a vortex. I realized it hadn't been following me at all, that it had been inside me from the start, carried by me, nurtured by me. As the realization sank in, the liquid surged upward, swallowing me whole for a moment. There was nothing, only the sensation of drowning in cold tar, lungs filling, heart stalling, vision going black, but then the pressure eased. I found myself lying on a trail, once more Bright Angel Trail in daylight. The sun hot against my skin, and the sound of mule bells clattering nearby, and tourists laughing echoing off the canyon walls, and I gasped and coughed and staggered to my feet, and for a brief second I thought I had dreamed it all, but then I saw my hands still wet, but that dark liquid dripping onto the dirt in vanishing as if the trail drank it up, and the mule train passed without glancing at me like I wasn't there, like I was only another shadow on the wall. And when I looked behind me up toward the rest house, I saw the bench, and on it sat the twisted figure, hunched arms around its knees. And this time, when it lifted its head, it was my own face staring back at me, mouth stretched into that impossible grin. I don't even know how long I stood there staring at the bench, staring at myself sitting hunched and twisted, the grin stretching wider than skin should allow. I swear the air around it shimmered like heat waves, though the morning was still cool, and when it breathed the sound matched mine exactly. No longer delayed, no longer chasing, just perfectly sensed, like we shared a single chest. For a second I thought maybe I hadn't escaped the cavern at all, maybe this was still inside. It's some hallucination laid over the canyon trail like a mask. But the tourists passing by didn't see it, or maybe they pretended not to see it. And that thought dug deeper under my ribs. Then the sight of the thing itself, he forced my legs to move. Away from the bench, away from that reflection of me that shouldn't exist, and I told myself I would climb back out of the canyon, that I would reach the trailhead parking lot and get in my car and drive until Arizona was nothing but a blur in my rear view. But each step upward felt heavier, like the canyon was pulling me back down. And every time I glanced over my shoulder, the switchbacks stretched longer than they should have, like they were multiplying behind me, and I could feel eyes on my back, though no one walked there by the time I reached the first rest house again. Crowd had thinned, the mule train gone, the tourists vanished, and the silence pressed in until I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And the bench was empty this time, though the smell lingered thick and metallic, and I realized with a jolt of dread that I had no memory of passing anyone on the way up, no groups, no families, no rangers. It was as if I had climbed through an empty park, though I knew Bright Angel never stayed empty, not even in the dead of winter. The higher I climbed, the more canyon changed, the walls to steep to smooth, like they had been polished by hands rather than carved by time. And when I touched the stone, it felt warm, pulsing faintly as if blood moved through it, and my fingers came away damp. That same black stain that followed me everywhere, and when I wiped them on my pants, the smear sank into the fabric, vanishing like it had been swallowed. And I began to think maybe the canyon itself was alive. Everything I had seen, the liquid, the figures, the double, was only its way of speaking to me. Tried to push the thought away, focusing instead on the trail dirt crunching underfoot, pack straps biting into my shoulders, sun glaring harder as it climbed overhead. But the more I tried to ground myself, the stranger everything became. The sky seemed closer, lower, pressing down like a lid, and the horizon shifted subtly with each step, as if the canyon rearranged itself behind my back. And at one switchback I looked up and saw the rim so close I thought I could reach it in 10 minutes. But after climbing hard for what felt like an hour, I looked up again, and it was still the same distance away. Me water bottles felt light when I shook them, though I knew I had barely drunk half. When I opened one to sip, the liquid inside was dark, not clear, and it burned my throat. And I swallowed, leaving the taste of pennies and ash, and I hurled the bottle away, gagging, but when it hit the ground, it burst open, not spilling water, but releasing a cloud of whispers that rushed past me into the canyon below. I realized then that whatever I carried up was not mine anymore, and maybe never had been. He staggered forward, dizzy, weak, but unwilling to stop. As I rounded another switchback, I saw a figure ahead standing in the middle of the trail, blocking the path, and I slowed my steps, dread twisting my gut because I knew before I got close that it would be me again, another version, another mask. When I was near enough to see clearly, I almost fell because this one wasn't twisted or hunched. It was perfect, a mirror image of me standing tall, relaxed, smiling, and natural. Smile like one I hadn't worn in years. It raised its hand in greeting like an old friend. He froze staring because it looked exactly how I wanted to look, unbothered, confident, alive. And when it spoke, the voice was warm, familiar. It said, "You don't have to fight anymore. You can rest now. Let me take it from here." I felt such a powerful wave of relief wash over me that my knees nearly buckled. Because God, I wanted to stop. I wanted to hand it all over and be free of the weight pressing down. But then I noticed the eyes, its eyes, my eyes. They were too bright, too sharp like glass catching firelight. The smile stretched a fraction wider, showing teeth too long. I knew it wasn't me, not really. He shook my head, backing away, but the figure matched me step for step, not menacing, not threatening, just patient. I get it all the time in the world, and it said again, softer this time, "You don't have to carry it anymore," and the words sank deep because I didn't know what it meant by it, but I knew I carried something heavy, something that wasn't mine. My chest ached at the thought, and I almost reached out my hand, but then the wind shifted, carrying that stink of iron and rot stronger than ever, and I gagged. And the spell broke, and I bolted forward, shoving past. I tossed, I passed. I felt its hand brush my shoulder, cold as stone, and for an instant my vision went black. I saw flashes like lightning against closed eyelids, hundreds of bodies kneeling in that cavern, mouths opening with my scream pouring out of them. There's of black liquid flooding upward, swallowing sunlight, bones stacked into towers, higher than the canyon rim, and at the top of one tower sat that twisted, grin-faced version of me. Eyes hollow as caves, and then the vision snapped and I was running, breath-ragged legs. Burning heart slamming like a drum, trail warped around me, switchbacks bending in ways that made no sense, corners folding back on themselves until I wasn't sure if I was climbing or descending anymore, and at one point I swore I passed the same dead tree 3 times, bark peeled back like skin, and pulsing faintly under my hand, and the realization that I was trapped in a loop nearly broke me because every ounce of strength I had was aimed at reaching the rim. Now it felt impossibly stopped finally, chest heaving, hands shaking, and when I looked down at my pack, it had split open again, the zipper burst, teeth bent, and inside there was no gear, only black water swirling endlessly and rising higher with each heartbeat, like it was going to spill out and drown me, and I grabbed the edges, yanking it shut with a scream. But the noise echoed back, distorted, dozens of versions of my own voice overlapping until I dropped the pack entirely and stumbled back. I lay on the ground, throbbing like a living heart. I thought about leaving it there, abandoning it, and sprinting for the rim, but some instinct deep and cruel told me if I left it I would never make it out, that it would drag me back no matter how far I ran. so I forced myself to pick it up again, slinging the weight over my shoulders. Even though it felt like carrying a coffin, and when it settled against my back, I swear I felt arms wrap around me from inside, clutching tight, fingers digging into my ribs. I staggered forward, choking back tears somewhere above the rim. A sound broke the silence, faint at first, then clearer voices, not whispers this time, but laughter, real human laughter, children, maybe tourists shouting. For the first time in hours, maybe days, I felt hope surge sharp and painful in my chest. I thought maybe I was close, maybe I would break through and find the world again. I pushed harder, climbing faster, dragging my body up switchback after switchback, until my legs felt like snapping bit. When I rounded the last corner, I saw not the rim, not the parking lot, but another bench just like the one at the rest house. On it sat the twisted version of me, hunched arms wrapped around its knees, grin tearing wide. And beside it sat the perfect version, smiling warm and inviting in between them. They patted the bench as if saving a space, and in unison both said, "Sit." I froze when they said it, that single word echoing from both mouths at once. Sit. And the sound of it was wrong. It wasn't just a command, it was a vibration. Rippled through the air and through my bones like it had been spoken inside me rather than outside, and my knees nearly buckled under the weight of it, my body leaning toward that bench like a puppet tugged by invisible strings, and every part of me screamed to resist. But another part whispered how good it would feel to stop, to rest, to finally let the burden go. Twisted one grin, wider teeth stretching jagged and endless, though the perfect one kept smiling calm and warm, and the contrast between them made my head spin like I was being torn into directions at once, one promising peace and the other promising oblivion. And I realized with a sick twist that maybe they were the same thing, just the faces of the same hunger dressed in different masks. To pull me closer, he backed away, shaking my head, muttering no wonder. My breath, though it sounded weak even to me, and the perfect one tilted its head like it pitied me and said, "You don't have to climb anymore, you don't have to bleed anymore, all you have to do is sit, and let us carry it for you." And the twisted and chuckled a sound like rocks grinding together and repeated the words, "Sit," louder, sharper. My legs buckled a second time. I dug my trekking pole into the dirt and forced myself upright, leaning on it like a lifeline, and I whispered to myself, keep moving, because I knew if I stopped, if I sat even for a second, would never rise again, and the canyon would swallow me whole. And so I turned and forced my feet to climb again, but the trail behind the bench bent in on itself, warped into a spiral that stretched far longer than it should have. In every few steps, I felt their eyes burning into my back, the perfect gaze warm, the twisted gaze searing as I climbed. The voices of the tourists returned, faint at first, then louder, drifting down from above, laughter and chatter and the faint clatter of mule bells. And for a moment I thought maybe I really was close, maybe the rim was within reach. But the sound carried an edge of distortion, like a recording played too slow, and when I focused I realized the laughter had no joy. It was hollow, sharp, like metal scraping, and the mule bells clanged out of rhythm like broken church chimes. When the children's voices rose, they didn't sound like children at all, but like something trying to imitate children, and failing. Smell of iron grew stronger. until every breath burned my nose and coated my tongue with the taste of blood. I coughed hard, spitting into the dirt, and the saliva that hit the ground was black and thick. It sizzled against the trail as if the stone couldn't bear it. The sight of it filled me with a terror so raw I wanted to claw my throat open to see what lived inside me, but I pushed forward, trembling with every step. Eventually the trail opened into a flat stretch, and in the middle of it was another cairn like the one I had seen before. But this one was taller, nearly twice my height, and made entirely of bones. Human bones stacked neatly, rib cages and femurs and skulls balanced with impossible precision, and at the top sat another version of me, smaller, thinner, frail, almost childlike, with eyes too big and hollow, and it whispered, not shouted, not commanded, but whispered, please stay, and the sound of it cracked something deep in me because it sounded desperate, lonely, like a child begging not to be left alone. I staggered closer against my better judgment, compelled by the frail voice, and as I approached, I saw the bone shift, breathing in unison with the figure on top, rising and falling as though the cairn itself was alive. And the childlike version of me reached down with one bony hand, skin stretched thin, eyes glistening with wet darkness, and said, stay with me, I don't want to be alone anymore. And the sadness in it nearly broke me. I felt tears burn in my eyes, because a part of me recognized that loneliness, a part of me carried it always, but then I noticed the bones at the base of the cairn, twitching fingers, flexing jaws, opening silently. I realized these weren't offerings or remnants. They were still alive, trapped in the stack, held in place by someone stronger than theirs, and the childlike version wasn't alone at all. It was surrounded by countless bodies, all whispering. The mouths that couldn't open, and I stumbled back, horrified, and screamed, no. And the word echoed across the flat stretch louder than I expected, as if the canyon itself wanted to hear. The cairn shuddered, bones clattering like dice, and the childlike me shrieked, voice piercing, high and sharp. And the ground split beneath me, jagged cracks racing outward as black liquid bubbled up from below. I ran again, sprinting across the flat stretch as the cairn collapsed behind me, bones scattering, writhing as if they had been released from something worse than death. And I didn't look back, I couldn't, because the sound of their wails was too much. The trail pitched upward again, steeper than ever, and I clawed at the rock with hands, raw and bleeding, dragging myself higher step by step. The voices below merged into a single roar. My name screamed in 1,000 variations, some pleading, some demanding, some laughing. It felt like they were inside my skull, bouncing against the walls of my mind until I thought it would split, but I kept climbing, teeth gritted, tears streaming hot down my face, mixing with the stink of blood and sweat and iron. At last, I saw light ahead, real sunlight, not the strange black glow, not the liquid shimmer, but true golden light spilling down. I screamed with relief, dragging my body toward it until I broke out onto the rim, staggering onto solid ground, and for a heartbeat, I thought I was free, because the parking lot stretched out before me, filled with cars and people, and the bright, clean air of morning washing over Mebiet. As I stumbled forward, I noticed the people weren't moving. They stood frozen, mid-step, mid-laugh, mid-gesture, their faces turned toward me, but their eyes, blank, smooth plains of skin, like the faceless kneelers in the cavern. And when I reached for one, their head turned slowly, features existed to see, and the air grew heavy again, pressing down, and the smell returned stronger. Then Avery turned back toward the canyon and saw them, all of them, the twisted one, the perfect one, the childlike one, all sitting on benches arranged along the rim, grins wide, eyes sharp or hollow or wet, and in unison they lifted their hands and beckoned, and the frozen people around me began to whisper my name in voices that didn't belong to them, and the world tilted as if the canyon was about to swallow the rim whole. The frozen people whispering my name moved in jerks like marionettes pulled by tangled strings, their limbs stiff, their joints cracking as they shuffled toward me. The sound of their steps on the pavement was like stone on stone, dragging rough and sharp, and I backed away toward the edge of the lot, clutching my pack tighter, though the weight of it pressed heavier than ever, like it wanted to pull me down to the ground and keep me. The race shouted for help, my voice raw tearing from my throat, but the whispers drowned it out. Dozens, then hundreds, all whispering the same name, my name in unison, each syllable blade slicing against my skull, and I clamped my hands over my ears. But it didn't matter, the sound came from inside, deeper than hearing, and the faceless heads tilted in perfect sync, every blank surface pointing toward me like eyes that weren't there, still seeing, still knowing. She spun toward the trailhead building, desperate to find someone, anyone, and the door stood open, the dark inside yawning wide, and I ran for it, stumbling across the asphalt, pushing through the frame into what I thought would be shelter, but the air inside was colder than outside, thick, damp, and smelling of rot, and I realized too late that I hadn't entered the ranger station at all, but something else, some hollow carve in the world, shaped to look like a building, but leading only down. The floor sloped steep and slick under my boots, like the inside of a throat swallowing me, and the light from outside faded fast, leaving me in dim glow, not from bulbs, but from veins running along the walls, faintly pulsing with black light, like liquid pumping through arteries, and my stomach churned as I pressed deeper, unable to stop the momentum carrying me downward. The whispers followed, pressing close, echoing through the walls, until the stone itself seemed to speak my name in 1,000 voices. And the deeper I went, the louder they grew, until it was a roar filling every inch of space. I clutched my head, staggering half blind as I descended the slope. And then the tunnel opened wide. I stumbled into a cavern larger than the one below the trail walls, stretching into darkness too far to see, and in the center a pit gaped wide, black water churning inside like an endless ocean, and the smell that rose from it nearly dropped me to my knees, thick, metallic, choking, and round the pit stood figures, not faceless this time, but all versions of me, every shape and size, some twisted, some whole, some broken, each one moving, lips in unison whispering my name. I staggered forward, unable to look away, and as I neared the pit, the water surged higher, splashing against the rim, though no drop spilled over, and shapes rose from the surface. Arms, torsos, faces, all versions of me again, grasping, reaching as if begging to be pulled free. But when one broke the surface completely, I saw its eyes, hollow sockets dripping black, its jaw unhinged wide enough to split its skull as it screamed my name and sank back under, dragged by unseen hands. Crowd of versions around the pit turned toward me, and in a single voice they said, "Give it back," and the sound was so powerful I felt my bones vibrate, teeth rattling in my jaw, and I screamed, "Back, I don't know what you want, I don't know what it is." But they only repeated, "Give it back," louder, harsher, until the cavern shook, dust raining from above at the weight of my pack, grew unbearable, crushing my spine until I dropped to my knees, clawing at the straps, desperate to rip it off, and as I tore it free, it hit the stone with a wet thud, splitting open once more, and the black water poured out in a flood, racing across the cavern floor toward the pit, but instead of falling in, it climbed upward against gravity, curling around the versions of me, wrapping them in thick coils, dragging them into the air like marionettes dangling on liquid strings. These screamed in voices that were mine and not mine, shrieking, "Give it back," over and over, as the water twisted them, tearing their bodies apart, reshaping them into grotesque forms, to long, to thin joints bending backward, skin splitting into gaping mouths. And still they screamed my name louder and louder until I thought my skull would split, and I clutched my head, curling on the ground, sobbing. The pit surged, higher waves of black liquid crashing against the walls, and the cavern shook with each impact. I realized with a cold certainty that if it overflowed, if that ocean spilled out, it wouldn't stop. It would cover everything, swallowing canyon, desert, sky, the whole world, drowning it in whispers and faces of me. I knew they expected me to give something to stop. Edie crawled toward the pack, still spilling water, though it seemed endless, heavier than oceans, and I shoved my hands inside, desperate and afraid. I felt something solid buried in the liquid, smooth, cold, pulsing faintly like a heart. And when my fingers closed around it, pain shot up my arm like fire, and the versions of me shrieked louder, "Give it back, give it back," until my eardrums felt ready to burst. He dragged the object free, stumbling backward, holding it up to the faint pulsing light, and what I saw nearly made me faint. It was my own skull, not bleached, not dead, but slick with blood, flesh still clinging to it, eyes rolling in the sockets, staring wild and panicked at me, and the jaw opened and closed in silent screams, and I realized with dawning horror that I had been carrying my own, had my own life ripped away and caged in this pack. The pit roared higher, black waves crashing, and the crowd of me surged closer, their hands reaching, clawing, desperate, eyes wide. They screamed, "Give it back," and I held the skull out, shaking, trembling, because every part of me wanted to throw it into the pit, to be done, to be free. But a deeper instinct whispered, no, whispered that if I gave it back, I would cease completely. Not just die, but be erased, absorbed into that endless ocean until nothing of me remained. So I clutched it tighter, pressing it to my chest, and screamed, "No." And the cavern fell silent instantly, every voice cut off at once, the pit stilled, the waves frozen, mid-curl, the liquid dripping motionless, and the silence rang louder than the screams had, and all the versions of me stared, blank eyes, wide mouths gaping, no sound escaping, and the silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then in the stillness, the perfect version of me stepped forward, from proud, smiling, calm, warm eyes glinting like glass, and it said softly, "You already gave it up long ago, you just don't remember." And as it spoke, the skull in my hands opened its mouth, and the sound that came out wasn't a scream, but laughter. Deep guttural laughter spilling into the cavern until it filled every corner. And the pit surged again higher than before, and I realized I hadn't stopped anything at all. The laughter from the skull in my arms rattled my chest with each pulse, like it was vibrating through my ribs and into my spine, and the sound was wrong layered, hundreds of times deeper than any throat should be able to produce, and every version. Me around the pit began to shake violently, their bodies jerking in spasms, like puppets with tangled strings, and the perfect one just smiled wider, as if everything was happening exactly as it wanted. He staggered back, holding the skull tighter, though its teeth snapped at my hands, each bite leaving shallow grooves in my skin, and hot blood spilled down my wrist and dripped onto the cavern floor. But instead of spreading, it sank straight down as though the stone itself was drinking it, and each drop made the pit swell higher, rippling in anticipation, like the water was waiting to taste more. The twisted version appeared next, stepping out from the shadows, hunched, grin splitting, so wide its skin tore at the corners, but no blood spilled, only darkness seeping out, and it leaned close until its grin nearly touched my face. Whispered, "Sit," and I almost did, because the command carried weight, like a hand pressing down on my shoulders, but the skull in my arm screamed again, shrill and jagged, and the sound jolted me enough to resist. Childlike version crawled forward, to dragging its frail body across the stone, with thin fingers snapping one by one as it moved. It reached toward me with eyes wide, wet and pitiful, and it whispered, "Please stay, please don't leave me," and the ache in my chest almost broke me, because the loneliness in that voice felt like my own, like the part of me that had always been left behind, ignored, forgotten, and I almost reached out. But the skull bit down on my wrist again, and the pain cleared my head. The cavern rumbled walls, shaking, dust raining down, and cracks split the ceiling, glowing with faint black light. I realized the whole place was collapsing, or maybe being born. Something massive shifting in the stone above us, and the pit surged again, spraying waves of black liquid that hissed when they struck the ground, leaving scorch marks behind, and I knew I couldn't stay. I had to get out or I'd be dragged down. With all of them, he turned and ran, clutching the skull against my chest, ignoring the way it writhed and bit and laughed, its voice splitting into multiple pitches at once, some high, some low, and the versions of me screamed in rage as I fled there, voices overlapping into a storm of "Give it back, give it back," and the twisted one leapt forward, landing on all fours, like some monstrous animal chasing me down the cavern floor, shaking with every impact of its hands, and feet. The tunnel that had swallowed me earlier loomed ahead, but it wasn't the same smooth slope that would writhe, twisting like the inside of a living throat lined with slick ridges that pulsed faintly, and the smell of rot poured out stronger than ever, but it was the only way, and I hurled myself inside, sliding down the slick surface as the twisted one shrieked behind me, clawing at the edges too wide to follow. The throat tunnel squeezed around me, tightening as if it wanted to crush me, and I slid faster, my body slick than whatever liquid coated the walls, and I clawed at the ridges to slow myself down. But they tore my hands open, and the blood mixed with the slime, leaving streaks of red across the walls, and the skull laughed harder as if feeding on the pain. I screamed back, shut up," but it only laughed louder until tears blurred my vision. Then, suddenly I burst out onto stone again, the light blinding after the darkness. I collapsed on my knees, gasping for breath, clutching the skull so tight my arms shook, and when my vision cleared, I realized I was no longer in the cavern, but back at the Bright Angel Trailhead, right where the pavement met the dirt. At the start of the descent, and the sun was shining overhead, tourists walking past, chatting like nothing had happened. Eddie staggered to my feet, wild eyes darting around. Nobody seemed to notice me. Nobody looked at the blood smeared down my arms. The skull clutched against my chest. They just walked by, smiling, taking pictures, sipping water and laughing like everything was normal. And for a brief, insane second, I thought maybe it had all been some hallucination, heat stroke, exhaustion, something. But then the skull in my arms whispered softly, almost tenderly, "You know better." I nearly dropped it in horror, back toward the parking lot, desperate to get away, to leave everything behind. As I reached my car, fumbling with keys slick with blood, I saw my reflection in the window, and my stomach turned because it wasn't me staring back. The face in the glass was the perfect version, smiling, calm, warm eyes glinting sharp. And when I lifted my free hand, the reflection lifted its own, but the skull in my other arm wasn't reflected at all, and the absence of it made the smile stretch wider until it split the whole face in two. Dove into the car, slamming the door, locking it, and jamming the key into the ignition hands, shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. But when the engine roared to life, I thought maybe I was free, maybe I could outrun this thing. So I threw the car into drive and tore out of the lot, gravel spitting behind me, tires squealing as tourists jumped back, shouting. Their faces never changed, never moved, their smiles plastered, frozen. Highways stretched out, endless desert, rolling past in waves of red and orange. But no matter how far I drove, the canyon never receded. It was always there in my mirrors, looming closer than it should have been, like the road bent back toward it again and again. And the skull on the seat beside me laughed between gasps, whispering, "Turn back. You can't leave, you never leave." And I slammed my fist against it, screaming, "Shut up." But it only laughed harder until the sound filled the whole car mile. A mile passed, though the odometer never changed, stuck at 0 no matter how far. I pressed the pedal down and the fuel gauge never dropped, frozen at half full. And I realized then with a cold sinking horror that I wasn't leaving at all. I was driving deeper, circling the canyon in ways the road shouldn't allow, and every sign I passed was the same wooden board reading Bright Angel Trailhead, next right. The sun never moved overhead, frozen high noon beating down merciless, and the desert blurred at the edges like a painting melting, and I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles, white veins bulging in my arms as I screamed and pressed the pedal harder until the car shook and the engine roared. But the sign appeared again, Bright Angel Trailhead, next right, and my breath caught as I realized I was back in the parking lot, again pulling up to the same curb where I had started. The tourists were still there, smiling, frozen, their mouths moving faintly, though no sound came out. I killed the engine, heart hammering, chest heaving, and the skull beside me whispered, "Welcome home." Its teeth clicked shut as if sealing the words into the air, and I looked up at the rear view mirror and saw not my face but the twisted grin version hunched in the back seat, staring at me with hollow eyes and torn skin stretched wide. And I screamed until my throat tore raw. Twisted grin version of me in the rear view didn't move at first, it just sat there hunched low, Its torn mouth, stretched wider than skin, should allow eyes hollow pools that swallowed every sliver. Blight in the car, and I stared at it frozen. In the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles cracked. Because I knew if I turned around, if I looked directly at it, I wouldn't come back. So I kept my eyes locked on the mirror, whispering to myself, it isn't real, it isn't real, but the mirror trembled faintly as if it were breathing skull on the passenger seat. Clicked its teeth together in slow rhythm like a clock ticking away seconds. And the grin behind me leaned closer in the glass, its face pressing against the mirror's surface, flattening until cracks spider-webbed outward. With each grin wider, sharper skin peeling back like wet paper, and I couldn't help it, I turned. The back seat was empty, no one there, no torn face, no hollow eyes, just shadows. And the faint scent of iron lingering like breath on my neck. He turned back fast, gripping the wheel. But the reflection in the mirror was no longer mine. The perfect version stared back, smiling calm eyes glinting with that impossible glassy shine. It mouthed words silently, though I heard them inside my skull as clear as if I had spoken them. I self-give it back, and my stomach lurched because I still clutched the skull on the seat beside me. And I realized they weren't asking, they were demanding. Just shoved the car into gear, screeching out of the lot, desperate to escape again. And the road unspooled in front of me, endless desert rippling under the frozen noon sun. But my stomach twisted because I knew it was pointless. I knew I would circle back to the trailhead again, no matter how fast I drove. But I pressed the pedal down anyway, heart hammering, blood pounding in my ears because moving felt better than waiting. The signs blurred past Bright Angel Trailhead, next right, Bright Angel Trailhead, next right, over and over the same board, splintered wood peeling paint, each one identical, and the laughter of the skull filled the car, bouncing off the windows like radio static until I slammed my hand down on it, grabbing its jaw and hurling it out the window with a scream, watching it tumble end over end into the desert sand. For a moment I felt relief, my chest loosening, the sound gone, silence rushing in like cool water. I almost laughed in disbelief, but then I glanced at the passenger seat, and the skull sat there again, blood-slick jaw opening, wide teeth clicking faster, louder, louder, until the rhythm became words whispered between clacks. Give it back, give it back, give it back. And I slammed my fists against the wheel, screaming until tears blurred my vision. Desert blurred, more edges, melting colors bleeding into one another, and the road began to ripple like liquid tires splashing. With each turn, the wood jerking in my hands as if something below wanted to drag me under, and I fought it, wrestling the car to stay straight until the road bent hard without warning, and I realized too late it wasn't a road at all, but a narrow trail twisting down into the canyon, and my headlights illuminated stone walls rising high on either side of the car, screeched tires shrieking, sparks flying as it somehow clung to the impossible path. And I knew that I wasn't driving anymore. Canyon had taken hold, dragging me back down into its throat, and I slammed the brakes over and over, but the pedal sank useless into the floor, and the wheel spun on its own, my hands burning against it, and the skull cackled louder with every turn as the trail plunged deeper. Then with a bone-shattering jolt, the car stopped, the world went silent, and when I opened my eyes, was no longer sitting in the driver's seat. I was standing barefoot on stone back inside the cavern, the pit before me wider than ever, black water surging high enough to lick the ceiling, and hundreds of versions of me lying, the rim eyes fixed on me, mouths opening and closing in silent demand. Give it back. The skull was in my hands again, though I had no memory of picking it up, and it pulsed hot now like a living heart, veins of black threading across its surface, and the jaw snapped open, screaming with my own voice, raw and desperate. I don't want this, take it back, and I staggered forward to the edge of the pit, ready to hurl it and ready to be done, but something deep inside screamed louder, no, if you give it back, you into. We froze, trembling on the edge. The skull fighting in my hands, biting, clawing like it wanted to dive into the pit on its own. And the versions of me surged closer, hundreds of hands reaching, grabbing my arms, shoulders, legs, their touch freezing cold, each grip burning into my skin like brands. And their mouths moved faster, chanting, give it back, until the cavern roared like a hurricane, and I screamed back, what is it, what? Did I take what is mine? And they all stopped at once, falling silent, heads snapping toward me in unison. Perfect version stepped forward from the crowd, smiling, calm, warm. But the warmth cracked now, edges, sharp teeth just visible beneath the lips. It said, you gave it up long ago, you bled it out into the canyon, and it grew into this. And now you carry it again, whether you want to or not, and if you refuse to return it, we all remain trapped here forever. And its voice trembled on forever, like the words stretched into eternity. I felt my knees weaken, twisted, one crawled forward, next grinned, splitting wider, until it split its whole head open, revealing black nothing inside. The hiss said, let it be over, and the childlike one clutched my leg, tears streaming from hollow sockets, whispering, please, please stay with me. I screamed, shaking them off, stumbling backwards, skull clutched against my chest. Because I couldn't choose, I couldn't decide which fate was worse. To give it back and be erased, or to keep it and carry this forever. The pit surged, higher waves of black liquid crashing against the walls, spraying droplets that burned holes into stone. And the cavern shook so violently I thought it would collapse, crushing all of us, and above through cracks in the ceiling I glimpsed the sky splitting open, noon sun shattered, replaced by black light pouring down in streams thick as tar, and the whole world tilted like it was falling into the pit. Versions me wailed, screaming, shrieking, their voices piercing enough to shatter bone. And they fell to their knees, hands raised to the sky, mouths stretched wider than human faces should allow, begging for something unseen. And I stood alone at the edge, skull thrashing in my grip, knowing the choice was mine alone, no one else to take it from me, no way to delay any longer. And I felt something inside me snap, erased the skull high above my head, veins bulging in my arms, screaming with every ounce breath I had left. And the cavern shook, the pit roared, the voices fell silent, all watching, waiting for the moment. And my hands trembled as I felt myself tipping forward, deciding at last whether to cast it back into the ocean of black, or to crush it against the stone and end everything in fire and silence and nothingness. Perfect version of me with its face torn open into nothing but teeth leaned so close I could feel the cold of it against my skin, like standing before the mouth of a cave. And the skull in my arms pulsed harder, veins bulging black against bone, sinking deeper into my hands until they skull's jaw clamped down, not in hunger but in ownership, like it belonged there. Like it had always belonged, and I knew there was no more time. The pit would rise and swallow everything. The cavern walls shook harder, stone raining down in sheets, cracks splitting open above, until the sky itself seemed ready to tear loose, black light pouring in thick. It started soaking the ground until my feet burned. At each step and all around me, the other versions screamed their demand. Give it back, louder and louder until the chant became thunder, vibrating through my chest, rattling my teeth, and I staggered at the edge, vision blur. Ingy looked down into the pit, water surging higher, slick arms breaking the surface, reaching for me. Versions of my face stretched to wide eyes, hollow teeth gnashing. I thought about throwing the skull and letting it sink and vanish, letting it feed whatever was below, but the thought of my entire self vanishing, erased into that black ocean, froze me. I clutched tighter because no matter how much it hurt, no matter how wrong it was, I could not let go. Twisted, one shrieked, lurching forward, crawling on hands and feet like an animal, grin tearing deeper until its head split open down the middle. Inside there was only more black water swirling, and it hurled itself at me, trying to drag me down, but the skull screamed louder, shrieking in my voice, and the twisted one burned away in a flash of light, leaving only smoke curling off the stone. Childlike one wailed, reaching, with broken arms, bones snapping, as it stretched further than possible, its voice cracking, please don't leave me, please stay with me. But the skull bit my hand again, blood spraying into its mouth. It laughed with the sound of a child's giggle turned wrong. The smaller version collapsed to ash, scattering into the pit, carried away by the surge. Perfect one remained, the calm smile never faltering, though the face was shredded into rows of teeth. It reached out a hand, warm, inviting, steady, and said, you cannot carry yourself forever. You are not strong enough, and its glass eyes pierced straight through me, and for a heartbeat I wanted to take that hand, wanted to give in, let someone else hold the weight. But the skull in my arms shuddered, violent, screaming no in 1,000 voices. I realized with horror that the skull wasn't protecting me, it was using me. It wanted to remain whole, it wanted me to refuse, so it could keep feeding, keep growing inside me until there was nothing left of the world. But Mimi knees buckled, I fell to the edge, toes inches from the pit, water spraying up cold, burning against my skin, and all the versions leaned closer, waiting. I felt my body split into one side, begging to give it back, the other side clutching it tighter until bones cracked and I screamed so loud. My throat tore raw, and with the last shred of strength I had, I raised the skull high above my head and smashed it down against the stone. The cavern erupted, the skull shattered into 1,000 shards, spraying blood and black water across the floor. Each piece still writhing, still laughing, still screaming, and the pit howled like a living thing, denied its meal, waves exploding upward, slamming against the ceiling, chunks of rock raining down. And every version of me shrieked in unison, collapsing, clawing at their faces as the light burst through, brighter than the sun, blinding, burning. Was lifted off my feet, thrown backward by the force, slammed against the wall, ribs snapping, vision going white. But in that instant I saw them all dissolve. Every twisted shape, every childlike shadow, every perfect smile dissolving into streams of black. that were pulled screaming back into the pit, and the water shrank, spiraling down, collapsing on itself until nothing remained but cracked stone steaming. The smoke silence fell heavy and crushing, no whispers, no laughter, no commands. Only the sound of my own ragged breath, and I realized the skull was gone, the weight was gone. Back was gone, and my hands, though torn and bleeding, were empty at last. Stumbled forward, knees shaking, chest heaving, and I climbed the slope leading out of the cavern. Though the walls were broken and raw like fresh wounds, and as I crawled upward, light poured down, real light, golden warm, and I dragged myself into it, collapsing onto the rim of the canyon. Bright Angel Trailhead stretching before me, quiet, empty. No tourists, no rangers, no cars, just silence and sky and stone. I lay there for hours, maybe days, staring at the sun, unmoving, unblinking, afraid to close my eyes in case I woke back in the pit, but the world stayed solid around me, real. When I finally rose to my feet, I felt lighter, though weaker, like something enormous had been carved out of me and left behind. He walked to the parking lot, and my car was there, keys in the ignition waiting, and when I looked into the rearview mirror, I saw only myself, gone pale, trembling, but myself, and no twisted grin, no perfect smile, no hollow eyes, and I laughed once, broken, sharp, but real, because I thought maybe it was over, maybe I had made it out. He drove away from the canyon without looking back, the highway unspooling beneath me, the desert stretching endless. And for the first time the odometer ticked forward, each mile real, each sign changing, each shadow shifting, natural again. And when the sun dipped low, I wept with relief, because it moved, it finally moved. But sometimes late at night when the world is still, I swear I hear it again, the faint click of teeth against bone, echoing from passenger seat. And the mirror, sometimes, just sometimes, I think the smile is still there waiting.